afternoon is always a little bit low pressure from the cosmic and the physical, so we'll try to concentrate. So we have completed the second Nishyanda, second flow, and we have reached such a high peak that now we can only come down. From Jivan Mukti, we have to go. So coming down means coming down to the yogic powers and vibhuti. It is always a descent. And this is a bit most probably inspired by the Yoga Sutras, where also the third chapter is vibhuti pada, and extraordinary powers. Now, when you speak of Jivan Mukti, the only thing which really helps is if you have known a Jivan Mukta. If you know what the Gita says in the second Adhyaya, who is that Sthita Prajna? Who is that who is established? And then he describes how does, Arjuna asks him, how does he move, how does he talk, how does he live, how does he, and so on. So this is only if you have experienced, then only you can identify what is that state. Now, if he comes down from this supreme state of Jivan Mukti to the yogic powers, it concerns, yogic powers concern the Prabhuta, who is not yet fully established, and well, they also concern the Suprabhuta because they occur spontaneously to the Jivan Mukta or the Suprabhuta. These powers come spontaneously. He doesn't have to do any effort or make any special mantras or anything to experience those powers. But the higher advanced the yogi or the Jivan Mukta is, the less importance he gives to vibhutis, or the less does he show them. See, the problem with those who are Prabhuta but not Suprabhuta is that once these powers come, then they want to show them, and then they want to become famous, and they want to have so many disciples, and this, that. And that's a great pitfall. But it seems a kind of law of nature that these powers do exist and they do come. They come either spontaneously or by some exercise, some rituals or some mantras, etc. Now, Kshimaracharya gives a summary of this whole section, which we don't need to read. Just only in the beginning, where he says that the first section was devoted to Nimilana Samadhi and the second to Unmilana. And yeah, this is just only the introductory sentence to his summary of the third section, page 127 in the book. Thus, by the two sections, the absorption into Spanda, principle for the manifestation of the state of the fully illuminated yogi, has been conclusively explained, which is to be brought about by both introversive Nimilana and extroversive Unmilana meditation, both of which are to be interpenetrative. Upaya Visarga Arani Bhuta, and this is a beautiful expression. Ubhaya Visarga, Visarga means like the two dots of the Visarga. And Arani, if you remember Vedic fire ritual, Arani are the two fire sticks by which you churn the fire. So the two combination of the introverted samadhi and the, I would not call it extroverted, but I would call it universal, because this is Vishwamaya. Samadhi, they are like the 2 points of the Visarga, and they are like the two fire sticks which have to be joined together. And meditation is often beautifully compared to the kindling of the fire by rubbing the two fire sticks. Then, of course, which are the two? The two are prana and apana, the two breaths. So rubbing the two breaths together, and when that spark comes, that is then udana, and then we have what we had before, that entering into sushumna. So this whole image is just contained in that one word, arani, fire sticks. So the two aspects have to be combined, or are ideally combined in the great yogi or the Jivan Mukta. So the whole summary we don't need to read, and he introduces the beginning of the third section. So Vibhuti Spanda. In this introduction, he connects the different verses from the first section. Again, we don't need to repeat that. And then he introduces this section by saying, now in order to prove the perfect enlightenment of the yogi by his power to rend asunder the condition of ordinary dream and deep sleep, the author is going to show his supernormal power in relation to the dream. So it starts with dream. Yatha icha abhyartito tata jagato artan hridistitan soma suryodayam kritva sampadayati dehina tata swapnepi abhishtartan pranayasya anatikramat nityam sputataram mati stito avasyam prakashayet. So it is first the question of the dreaming state. Now, in the case of the enlightened one, his dreaming state will be different. But the one difference is that he is aware in dream, and he is aware that he is dreaming. And we have many examples, and of course all the great yogis and the great saints, and they had all very significant dreams. And I think this is a very big subject. I have been invited by, Madhu Tandon.
Yes.
Madhu Tandon. Yes. She is a dream specialist, and she has invited me for a seminar on dream. And she's written that big book, And so that would be a subject from the yogic point of view. But I am definitely not going to give any paper. No, the significance of dreams in all religions, of course, dreams which are more than dreams, which are experiences. He doesn't say it exactly, but I mean that's all implied. Because the Jiva Mukta, if he dreams, I mean they are extremely significant dreams. Or if we are fortunate to have some very significant or spiritual dreams, then it's a very good sign for the progress. So he starts like this: as the sustainer of this universe, that is Shiva, when eagerly entreated with desire, accomplishes all the desires abiding in the heart of the embodied yogi, who is awake after causing the rise of the moon and the sun. So also in dream, by appearing in the central nadi, does he surely reveal always and more vividly his desired objects to him who never desists from his zealous prayer. So causing the sun and the moon to rise, we have already seen what it means. It means that the prana and the apana enter into the central nadi, central vein, sushumna, and the point here is the fulfillment of desires. So depending on the level of the yogi, of course, his desires may be different. The unenlightened or the enlightened, their desires will be different. And the Suprabhuta, he will have desires for the good of the whole world. But it is these dreams, spiritual dreams I would call them, they are, as it is said here, they are a gift of Shiva. They are a divine gift. Although he has some desires in his heart, but the divine is going to fulfill these desires. So if one goes to sleep with a certain desire, and then a certain dream comes to fulfill that desire. So this is the prerogative of Shiva. And Nityam Sputataram Matye Sthito Avashyam Prakashayet. Being established in the center, in the Matye, also here Matye means most probably Matya Nadi, in the central vein, of which even in the Vijnana Bhairava, Matya very often refers to the Matya Nadi, to the Sushumna. And obviously, Maharaja picks out the two dharanas from Vijnana Bhairava which are concerned with dream, sleep and dream. The 75 and 55. Yeah, which we already had because we were before talking about the state between waking and sleeping. So one should concentrate on the state when sleep has not yet come, but the external awareness has disappeared. There the Supreme Goddess revealed.
Which verse is this? Which verse?
Verse 75. 75.
Not in the book.
It's not in that book, it's in the...
131, second last time. She's looking at it.
Vijnana verse 75.
Yeah, I got the verse.
You mean in the Spanda Kārikā we are on page 130,
No, I wanted this.
130, 131. Yeah. Although this verse does not speak on dream, it speaks on the state in between. But one can assume that if one enters into dream from such a state of awareness, then the dream will be also very transparent. The point of that state is the transparency of the pure consciousness between waking and sleep. But it does not explicitly speak of dream. So 55 speaks of mastery over one's dreams. If the energy of breath is meditated upon as gross and feeble at Dvadashanta and entering the heart, bracket, at the time of sleeping, then one will attain mastery over one's dreams. And there are two versions, Supta Svatantriyam or Mukta Svatantriyam, but Swamiji has preferred Supta Svatantriyam. Independence over one's dreams, so that is really the prerogative of the advanced yogi. Now, which Dvadashanta is meant here? It is most probably the Brahmarantra. Entering in the heart, meditating at the place of Dvadashanta and entering into the heart. Means meditating in the heart, and then that state, a very subtle state, will come in which one has independence over dreams. So one is not a victim of nightmares, etc. That's at least the negative side of it.
But you know, this verse says this is Anavupaya. Now, Anavupaya is the inferior means?
Anavupaya is the lower.
Yes, the lower means.
Yeah.
Which means yogis also have lower means and superior
No, of course. I mean, yogis of every level. But for the yogis of the awakened type, you know, they don't have to aspire for they will get these revelations spontaneously. But here it's a question of praying also. Praying for who never desists from his zealous prayer, means the yogi who prays for a good dream. But Srimaraja in his introduction, he says that the power of the Suprabhuta to overcome the ordinary state of dream and deep sleep. So it can be applied to the different yogis depending on their condition. Now we come to verse 3, and the little introductory sentence is Yati punarevam savadhano na bhavati tata na asya yogina yogita iti aha. The author says, if a person is not thus concentrated, then he is not fit to be a yogi. I wouldn't say concentrated, savadhana, if he is not attentive, if he is not aware. And we had this again and again, avadhana. Again and again it reminds us of that Vijnana Bhairava. Yoginas tu visheshosti sambandhe savadhanata. They are aware of the connection, they are aware of the relation, they are aware of the unity. So that awareness is what has to be always there, even of the advanced, for the advanced yogi. Avadhana, who has been in the Ram Leela? You must have been. You remember when there's a Sutradhara who there's no mic in the Ram Leela in Ramnagar, in Benares. And then the Sutradhara, he gets up, and there are thousands of people, and he just with his hand he says, Chup raho, saudhan. And thousands of people are totally silent. It's so impressive because you have no mic and nothing. And there's thousands of people, and they only speak with their own natural voice. They don't have this thing. This Saudhan, and now I remember, but because it's so impressive, how he be attentive. It's beautiful. No? Anyatha tu svatantra syat srishtis tat dharmagatvataha satadam laukika seva jagat svatna padadvaye. Otherwise, the creative power of the divine, creative power he translates svatantra, according to its characteristics, is free in manifesting always all kinds of things to the yogi, both in waking and dream states, as in the case of the common people of the world. Yes, Srishti Svatantra, the free creative power, according to her own nature, tat dharmagatvataha. And she manifests in both states, waking and dreaming. To the yogi as well as to the ordinary people. So what is expressed here is also the danger of being pulled down if one is not in that state of awareness. And that being pulled down happens very easily in a dream or in sleep. Because if one is not advanced, then you have no control, and then you are overwhelmed by what is happening in dream. So the warning is always to be aware and attentive and conscious of what is going on, whether in waking or in dreaming. If the yogi does not always pray to the sustainer of the universe, Dhata, according to the method described, then in the absence of his remaining in this essential nature, this is important, there's some misprint in my edition at least, Svarupa Sthiti Abhavi, in the absence of his being established in his own true nature. This is very important. The divine creative power, whose nature is to manifest an object, to determine, etc., things of the usual and unusual kind, is quite free to show always to the yogi also similar things, both in the waking and dream states, as in the case of the common people of the world. The sense is that this throws the yogi also into the pit of transmigratory existence like the common people. As is said, the outgoing tendency of creatures is determined by the Lord's will. I don't know from where comes this quotation, but it reminds one of the Katha Upanishad, where it says that the Creator, the Swayambhu, he pierced the holes of the senses outward. That's why we are looking outside and not within. And that then a great sage, Kashchitira, he turned his gaze within and desiring immortality, and he found the self within. So this is what is meant. The natural tendency is to go outward, to be distracted by the senses outward. So even in the case of dream, it doesn't apply only to waking, but to dream also. Of course, in these verses one would require much more commentary with examples. It is a little too abstract. I mean, maybe the other commentators have gone into greater detail. Surely not the vritti, but thank you. So how to apply this concerning the dream in the case of the yogi? One thing is he has always to be aware and alert and not to be pulled down by the impressions and the desires which, if they don't appear in the waking state, they appear in the dream. So that warning is there, but actually it would require some more detailed explanation. But he says in the introduction to this, Kārikā 4 and 5, thus having established a means for cleaving asunder the conditions of dream and deep sleep in order to attain the state of the fully enlightened one, the author now elucidates with example and reason the means of absorption in the Spanda principle for the fully enlightened one, and exhorts that the knowledge of the object desired to be known is also possible in this way. So the previous verses were related to the not fully enlightened Abhuta. He gives a very ordinary example how you observe something, which first you perceive it vaguely, and then you look more closely, and then you perceive it more precisely. The same thing applies also to a dream. Yatahi arto asputo drishtaha savadhane pichetosi bhuyaha sputataha bhati svabala udyoga bhavitaha tata yat paramartena yena yata yata sitam tat tata balam akramya nachirat sampravartate. Indeed, just as a thing which, in spite of all the attentiveness of the mind, is perceived indistinctly at first, appears more distinctly later when observed with the strenuous exercise of one's power. It's an ordinary observation. So when the yogi resorts to the power of Spanda, then whatever thing actually exists in whichever form, in whichever place or time, in whichever state, that thing becomes at once manifest in that very way. Now, this is a vibhuti. This is a real yogic power. But the example of the normal perception, just the example is always given in the darkness. Is this a tree or is it a man? And then coming closer and observing more closely and so on. So, but in the case of the advanced yogi, he can perceive everything in any place and any time and any condition. And this is something which I think we have so many examples, and even before our own eyes. If the awareness is so highly developed, and we know this from Swamiji, probably from surely, that they can perceive things. And this is a vibhuti, this is a power which comes spontaneously. I'm just giving one example of when Swami Lakshman, the beginning of terrorism in Kashmir, and it was the first bomb explosion in Lal Chowk. And the devotees were sitting with Swamiji as usual in the garden, having their tea, kava, and having darshan and so on. And suddenly Swamiji stops and says, and jokingly he says, put the tea in your pocket and go home. Nobody could object, because they didn't know what does he mean, but they cannot, they can never say no. It was in such clarity, So immediately they went home. Everybody reached home safely. Then that bomb explosion in Lal Chowk took place, and nobody was injured. So he just saw it. He didn't explain, he didn't give a reason, but he just said immediately, you go home. So there are many such instances, and he never did it for showing off or anything, but he just saw that. So this is an example of what is meant here, of this power, that you can perceive, the yogi can perceive things independently of, see what will happen afterwards. Space, time, and condition. So I think we have many examples for this kind of power which is spontaneous. It comes as a side effect with the spiritual attainment.
Are there levels of yogi would really put it right in, if you're really saying, let us say like the Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, there are the levels of bodhisattvas. I mean, they are on the path of spiritualism, and they have 10 bhumis.
Yeah.
And each bhumi is correspondent with certain powers.
Yes, yes.
I don't know whether in this, when we are really talking of this yogi,
Yeah.
here the expression used is only the common man and the yogi.
Yeah.
So it appears that there's a big gap between the two.
Between
Between the common man
No. There is the Prabhuta. You see, there is Aprabhuta, Prabhuta, and Suprabhuta. But this is a very, as you say, very simple classification. Of course, there are also many
corresponding powers which come of its own.
Yeah, not in this text. I mean, this text, as you see, it's very brief and it doesn't go into details. You have other tantras which are, I mean, this is not a tantra, of course, tantras which describe these yogic powers, and then, of course, extensively in the Tantra Loka. But this kind of systematization, absolute systematization like of the Bodhisattvas, I am not remembering now any specific classification of which powers come to which type of yogi. I mean, it is said that it depends on the state of the yogi and the higher the powers, but this kind of classification I have not come across. Have you?
In the Kārikā, this 5 siddhas, no?
Which one?
5 siddhas.
The siddhas, yes, of course. The description of the siddhas, yeah. Yeah. What Swamiji said in that tape which we heard, the Charya siddhas and so on. The different classes of siddhas, they have different siddhis, different capacity, different powers.
To some extent, Patanjali Yoga Sutra also in Vibhuti Path.
7?
To some extent,
yeah.
The description is there in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, Vibhuti Path, which is
yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, Yoga Sutra, that is quite clear. Yoga Sutra is a text which is accepted in so many schools. But in this particular tradition, yes, the groups of siddhas with their particular powers, and one has to...
But siddhas path is quite different. I mean, they are almost like carrying on in the jet speed. But what we're really talking here is the common man and the yogis.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm a common man, I'm on the path of yogihood.
Yeah.
What are the different milestones?
Yeah. So in between, the stages in between, yes. They are not described very precisely here, at least not in this text, but I will... and of course, they are symptoms. You know, there's the expression yogi chinha, the signs of the yogi, which are certain experiences depending on the stage of the yogi, and they are not exactly siddhis, but they are powerful experiences, and they are described at different stages. In Swachanda Tantra there is something, you know, and especially in relation to the stages of shunya, the experiences of shunya, to which certain powers correspond in the Swachanda Tantra. So here the text is really a very brief, too brief, and not so with detailed examples. Again and again the same expression comes, which came before also. How does it happen? Balam akramya. Tat balam akramya means getting hold of that power. And bala, that power means Spanda. So the power of Spanda, and Spanda is often also called Spanda Shakti. So getting hold of that power of Spanda. It doesn't mean getting hold by any act of will, but just catching that moment or catching that power. Well, a very wonderfully practical result of this getting hold of the power is given in verse 6. Durbalopi tadakramya, again the same expression, tadakramya, getting hold of that. Yataha karye pravartate achadayet bubhuksham cha tata yo ati bubhukshita. So even if somebody is weak, just as a feeble person also by resorting to that power succeeds in doing what has to be done, even so one who is exceedingly hungry overcomes his hunger. So these are general siddhis which come to the yogi. And we have, of course, so many examples. I mean, there are yogis or yoginis who are not eating, or just not at all eating. And who apparently, without having the physical strength, but by the power of their spiritual strength, they can accomplish. And we have, of course, again, Milarepa is always the classical example. He was extremely weak, when he was living only on metals and so on. But what power he had! So this is that Durbalopi, even being physically weak, but the power to accomplish what one has to accomplish, and even without eating. So there we have so many examples. At the end of the commentary on this Kārikā, he says, for one who has entered the state of the mass of spiritual consciousness, there can be no subjection to the pairs of opposites. For the pairs of opposites function only in the stage of prana, and this, in the case of the yogi, gets merged in the stage of the spiritual consciousness. Now this is the reason given for that power. Spiritual consciousness is chit bhumi. So the chit bhumi nimagnatvat, because he is merged at the level of pure consciousness. You were asking the question of consciousness, chit bhumi, the level of pure consciousness. And he has dvandva abhibhava. He has transcended all the dvandvas. Dvandvas like heat and cold, hunger and thirst, and so on and so on. All these pairs of opposites which are limiting the ordinary human being, they are overcome on the strength of that level of consciousness, chit bhumi. Chit bhumau nimagnatvat. Because all these pairs of opposites are merged in that level of consciousness, chit bhumi. So we'll just take one more verse. I don't want to take too much text. Maybe this afternoon we will not do more than, I think 7 verses are enough. The third section has 19 verses, so we will be able to complete. Anena atishtite dehe yata savajnata adaya tata svatmani adishtanat sarvatra evam bhavishyati. So now the real yogic power is omniscience, savajnata. Just as all knowability, etc., in respect of the body occurs when it is pervaded by that, again, anena, Spanda principle you have to put in bracket. Even so, when the yogi is established in his essential self, he will have omniscience, etc., everywhere. Anena atishtite dehi yata savajnata adaya. So, omniscience, etc., that means all the powers of omniscience, all pervation, vyapakatva, etc. So the condition is given very briefly. Anena atishtite dehi. If the body is the power which is guiding the body depends on that means, on that spanda, then he has access to omniscience. And that spanda we have encountered it in the cases of, atikoto, prahishtovar, in states of intensity. That's where it is experienced. And these states of intensity, they have to be preserved by awareness, avadhana. They have to be constantly, well, he says you should not become loose. The awareness should not shitili bhavati, should not become loose. So losing that intensity, losing that state of awareness, that would be the opposite. But maintaining that, or being presided over by this power, and Spanda is then often called as bala, by that power, then he has access to omniscience. Svatmani adishtanat. We had used that expression, being the master in your own house, being the established in your own self. Then he gives the different powers, omniscience. When the body is pervaded by this, that is by the Spanda principle, which is one's own essential self, svasvabhava atmana, Spanda tatvena adhishtite, vyapte dehe, body is pervaded, then as experiences of things suited to that state, such as states of all knowability, all doership, manifest themselves to the embodied being. So, if the yogi gets established in his imperishable self, that is a spiritual consciousness recognized as such, if he is steadily absorbed in that state, either by withdrawing his sense or within himself, etc., or as a tortoise, that we have seen that before, or by the device of the expansion of all-embracing consciousness, vikasa, then he acquires omniscience and omnipotence, powers appropriate to Shiva everywhere. So these, the two main powers Sarvajñata and Sarvakartrita. So the whole discussion on what means omniscience in relation to, we have this text on the Sarvajñata of the Buddha, with a lot of discussion, and what does it mean in relation to the enlightened yogi. But he doesn't go into this. And maybe one more verse, because I like this. It's not so difficult also. Jnana viluntika dehi tasyascha ajnanataha sritihi tatumesha viluptam chet kuthasa syat ahetuka. Just as a plunderer carries away the valuables of the house, even so depression saps away the vitality of the body. Now this is the opposite. Jnana viluntika. Now jnana is, he translates it as depression, but it's a kind of lassitude. You know, the only condition to stick to that power of Spanda was the constant awareness, state of intense awareness. Now if that awareness slackens and you become lazy, you become and that laziness translates into a negative state. So jnana, it's not wrong also to translate it as depression. This depression proceeds from ignorance. If that ignorance disappears by unmesha, how can that depression last in the absence of its cause? Unmesha vilupta. Now, the loss of awareness. Unmesha also means awakening, also means awareness, awakening. So this happens by the loss of awareness. And if that ignorance disappears by unmesha, how can that depression last in the absence of its cause? Ajnanataha, out of ignorance. But ignorance means a lack of awareness. So again and again we come to the same point that the main experience of Spanda is an experience of intensity of awareness. And if that intensity slackens or is lost, then everything is lost. It's like the thieves break into your house, and that house is your own mind, and they take away all the treasures which you have already accumulated, the spiritual treasures. As at the end, he says this, also the verse which we recite, the second one. Jnana dhanam, the treasure of knowledge. This treasure will be stolen by your own weakness, by your own slackness, or by your own lack of awareness. So this is a very important warning. Again, like before, we had the thieves on the way, stealing, and these thieves were the gunas. And here the thief is their own lack of intense awareness.
So is that like a warning to the aspirant to continually work on yourself? They don't, once they get some of these bhumis or realizations, it doesn't just keep flowing by itself. You have to keep working on it.
Yes. So until you are Suprabhuta, until you are Jivan Mukta, one has to be always aware, guarding one's house from losing that treasure which you have already received.
So what's the practical method?
But this is the whole, everything is based on awareness. So to stay with that experience and not to let it go, not to let it, once you have received it, then you be aware and be intensely aware of that treasure and to maintain it, to retain it. And that's why the basic practice is practice of awareness. Which of course meditation, etc., it's all part of increasing that awareness and increasing that state of consciousness. So it ends with that warning, and what is it? Yeah, he says very nicely that what means glani, which he translated as depression, means the disappearance of the essential delight, tatrika harshasya kshaya. The basic essential joy, if that is lost, then a kind of depression. And we find many spiritual people, many people who are on the spiritual path, at some point, they sink into a kind of a depression. They think, oh, I'm not making an advancement, I am not any. So it's a very dangerous thing, being on the spiritual path and then entering in that state of disillusionment or depression. It's very dangerous. That's why again and again he says satatam, being continuously in that state of awareness. Okay, I think we stop here for today, and because there are many personal talks are still pending, and tomorrow.
And this verse, in the beginning, this author says that he will have this experience also through his grace.
Yeah.
This. Translation.
On which, on the last sloka? The last
49.
Huh?
Introduction to the 8th verse.
To the 8th.
Introduction.
Yeah. Etat prasadena. Notice etat, if he says it is a spanda, by grace of that, you will have, these spiritual powers, they are of course an aspect of grace. They are an expression of grace. Etam prasadena.